Chasing Leviathan is a podcast about pursuing truth, one big question at a time through the discipline of listening. Truth is too big to tame, but if we pay close attention, we might get the chance to glimpse something truly magnificent. So please join me in this pursuit, 1 week at a time. Hello and welcome to Chasing Leviathan. I'm your host, PJ Wehry, and I'm here with Dr. Martin Glazier, scientific collaborator in the Department of Philosophy at the University of Geneva. Dr. Glazier, wonderful to have you today.
Thanks for having me on, PJ.
So today we're talking about your book, Essence, which is in the Elements in Metaphysics from Cambridge University Press. Talk to us a little bit about how you came to write this book. I mean, in some ways, it feels like one of those really classical philosophical questions, right? What is the essence of something? So what drew you to write like this book and this subject matter?
I actually got into it sort of through a different kind of topic, the topic of explanation. So like, you know, from one of the first sort of things I got interested in philosophy was sort of thinking about big ideas about explanations. I remember like, you know, in high school, I remember I was learning physics and kind of felt like I sort of had unlocked the key to the universe in some way. Like I remember walking around in my neighborhood in October or something like that and looking at the leaves falling down from the trees and thinking like, oh, this is all it's all classical mechanics. It's like that's all that's going on here. You know, I don't really, I'm not so confident in that idea anymore, but I still later was just really interested in like, what does that even amount to? Like, what is the idea there? It's not supposed to be that like, there really aren't any leaves falling or anything like that. And all there is little particles. That seems crazy. Of course, there are these leaves and trees and everything else that I'm seeing. So it seems, I sort of think, well, the best version of the idea is that like, you know, everything about the leaves and the trees and so on can be explained in terms of what's going on at the fundamental physical level. So, but then, you know, what sort of explanation is that we're talking about? It's not exactly the same kind of explanation that you might give of like, you know, why did this window shatter? Oh, because, you know, a rock hit it or something like that. Well, that's a kind of causal explanation. That doesn't seem to be like what's going on here. If you explain, you know, why is the leaf moving this way in terms of the way the particles are moving? There's a kind of tighter connection there, or at least at any rate, a different kind of connection. And, you know, I think it's this kind of connection or form of explanation that a lot of people have been getting interested in philosophy lately. And it's something that I then sort of spent a lot of time doing research on in graduate school and afterwards. And sometimes people call it grounding explanation. The idea is that it's supposed to be the same kind of explanation that you might give of why a war progressed in a certain way by talking about the actions of the individuals that made up the war. Why a cup of coffee is hot by talking about the motions of the molecules that make up the coffee. And somehow that's the kind of explanation that's involved in this picture. So I was really interested in that and doing a lot of thinking about that. But I started to think that maybe philosophers are going a bit too overboard with this kind of explanation and thinking that it was sort of the only kind of explanation there was, or maybe the only kind of explanation other than causal explanation. I started to think that, you know, there are other kinds of explanation, even within metaphysics, which was the area of philosophy that I was mostly working in. There's something else going on besides just this grounding type of explanation. So one example of another kind of explanation I started to think was like a kind of explanation that can be given by the essences of things. So we could explain, you know, why does it always turn out that whenever I have water, there's some hydrogen atoms in there? Why is that? Well, it seems like the answer is like, well, water is by its very nature H2O, and that's why no sample of water can be entirely free of hydrogen atoms. Or, you know, why is it that you can never make a robot cat? I mean, you can make a robot that behaves like a cat and maybe looks like a cat, but it's not going to be a cat. And why is that? Well, it seems like the answer is that, what a cat is essentially, or by its very nature, is a certain kind of animal. And so that's why you can't make a robot cat. So, I started thinking, okay, this is another important kind of explanation, but it's a kind of explanation that seems to be given by essences. And so, what are essences? What are we talking about here when we say that water is by its nature H2O, or cats are by their nature animals? And so that's how I got interested in the topic of the book. I wanted to try to understand what was going on there.
Who are some philosophers that you are pulling from for these kind of discussions?
Well, the topic's been discussed for a really long time in philosophy. It's just one of the oldest topics that have been discussed in metaphysics. So, even Plato and even more so Aristotle said a lot of things about essence. In this book, I'm mostly focusing on more recent work. Partly it's a matter of competence. That's the stuff I'm more familiar with. It's also just kind of to understand where the discussion is at right now. And so these days, there's a lot of people writing on the topic, but part of the reason another part of the reason why I got into it, I think, is that my advisor in graduate school, a philosopher named Kit Fine, was one of the biggest contributors to people that have developed this topic. So he plays a large role in this book. But there's other figures like E.J. Lowe, Bob Hale, Catherine Kozlicki, and many other philosophers who have had interesting things to say about this topic.
Gotcha. And so for you, a large part of this book, I mean, these are very short, which, for some people, they look at the price and they're like, well, it's a short book. I'm like, yeah, but you get a short book and you can actually read it. So the main one of the main parts of your argument is the distinction between active and latent facts. Can you share a little bit about not a little bit, I understand that's probably like the key point, right? If you don't understand that, I don't think anyone can understand really your argument, right? Can you discuss that distinction?
Yeah, so I was I wanted to try to the aim of the book was sort of partly the aim of the book was just to introduce the topic and get people up to speed with what is going on now in the debate around essence. But I wanted to kind of do it in a coherent way and not just say like, oh, here's this thing about essence and here's this other thing. So I started to think, what is a really interesting question about this that it seems to me to have been kind of underexplored. And there's this idea that I think you can sort of question that you can extract even from some of the oldest work on the topic, even going back to the ancient philosophers. And the question is something like, are facts about essence, or are essences inside our everyday world, or do they somehow lie outside the world? Now that's like, just put it like that, it's very hard to know how to make sense of this. But I thought that maybe one way to try to clarify this idea would be in terms of this distinction between active and latent facts. So active facts, I'm thinking, these are just kind of like facts that say how things are. Like, I'm talking to you on a podcast. It's cloudy outside. Whatever. Hamburg is 300 kilometers from Berlin. Tokyo's the capital of Japan, and so on. Just all these kind of facts about how things are. Those I'm going to call active. And then we could sort of contrast those to facts about how things were, or how they will be, or how they could have been, or how they must be. So, facts about what happened in the past, facts about what will happen in the future, facts like about how things could have gone, like maybe COVID didn't have to become a global pandemic, certain other different things that happened 2019. That's a sort of fact about what could have happened but didn't. Then facts about what must be the case, like, what goes up must come down, or things like that. Energy is conserved. These, I'm thinking, they seem to be different in character from the active facts that I talked about before. They're not telling you about how things are, but sort of about how they were, or they will be, or they might be, or they must be. And that's kind of, so we could then try to think more about how to exactly make that distinction precise. But I was thinking there's a kind of just intuitive distinction that you can grasp there. And then we can ask, okay, which side of the distinction do essence facts go on? are they kind of like these facts about the past or the future or different possibilities? Or are they facts about how things are right now? And so so that was kind of the question that I tried to frame much of the book around, and to see how so much of what other philosopher work that other philosophers have done on essence might shed light on this issue.
And the exact example escapes me. You were talking about latent facts, and you were talking about possible facts, versus what seemed to, what goes up, what must come down. That's the one that you used. That would not be considered an active fact. That would be a latent fact.
Yeah, I was thinking that these facts in the second category, I'm going to call them latent facts.
Yes.
Yeah.
To me though, I'm just looking at it. So I'm trying to understand why those aren't inactive facts. Why, like, obviously I can understand the difference between like if statements, right? Like, but when you're talking about these almost like principles, like,
Yeah.
what goes up must go down. Why why are those in latent facts?
Yeah, I'm thinking that, well, one idea I kind of like is this idea that the latent facts are somehow pointing beyond the way things are. So it's saying what goes up must come down. It's not just talking about how things in fact are, but like no matter what happens, this is a law of nature or something like that. Things have to obey this law. So
Okay, and so like if something is falling, that would be an active fact. The fact that if something goes up and then it falls, and as a rule is okay.
Yeah,
sorry,
the fact
I was
that
just trying to.
it must fall. That's
Yeah.
the
Okay,
latent fact. Yeah.
gotcha. All right. Sorry, I was struggling with that one because I was like, I mean, that's the way things are. Like if I drop things, okay. I'm tracking now. Got it.
No, it is confusing because, and that's why, yeah, I mean, that was something I struggled with even in coming up with the terminology, because I think I was originally calling them like dormant facts, but I don't, that seems bad because they have these real effects and like they tell you something about the way things are. So then I switched to this other word, which is perhaps just more obscure, but hopefully
Oh
no
man,
one gets the
terminology.
connotation.
Yeah. At least you used words that don't have like, I mean, when you say essence, I mean, you want to talk about a very debated and like word that's all over the place throughout philosophy, right? Like in terms of definition, at least like active and latent, I haven't seen that a lot. You know what I mean? So I appreciate that. I'm like, okay, if I understand your definition, I can use this. And most of the time people know what I'm talking about. uh, also just wanted to mention, not as a criticism of the book, but I was disappointed that you are not, in fact, going to give us the essence of golf as I was going through. But that was a great first example. Can you talk us through that case and maybe as even a case study in common misconceptions that people have about essence or common missteps people make?
Yeah. I mean, this is a funny example of how like this kind of seemingly abstract philosophical concept comes up in something that's has at least some relevance to people's lives. So this was actually a Supreme Court case from around the turn of the century, and basically what happened was there was this guy. He was a golf coach, but he had a certain disability, which meant that he wasn't really able to walk the golf course. He had to use a golf cart. Okay, so there was a organizer of golf tournaments in the US PGA Tour, which prohibited people from using golf carts. He said, if you want to compete in this tournament, you have to walk the course. That's their rule. So he sued them and said, look, I have a disability. You're legally required to accommodate this. I can't walk the course. And this eventually got all the way to the Supreme Court. So you had these justices weighing in on this. And the opinion of the court was written by John Paul Stevens, and he basically said, look, he had a number of arguments that he gave to support the ruling, but one of them was that this it's not inconsistent with the essence of golf to allow someone like this person to use a golf cart. He said, no, look, the essence of golf, like, what if we had to say what golf really is? he said, well, it's using something like using clubs to cause a ball to progress to a hole or something like this. And it doesn't involve walking. That's not, that may be something that people do a lot of the time when they're playing golf. Maybe it's even something that would be nice to do, but it's not part of what golf is. Okay, so then, the dissent was written by Antonin Scalia, and he basically said, as far as I can make out, his response was that this stuff about the essence of golf is nonsense because we can't make any sense of this idea that there is an essence of golf. And his argument is not very good, I think. One of the things he says is that games, a game like golf or anything else, none of the rules to that game can be essential because there's no purpose that the game is serving. The purpose of the game is only to have fun, and so since purpose of the game is just to have fun, nothing can be essential to it. It seems like he was thinking of the idea that, you say that something's essential in the sense that you need it to do something. Like a passport is essential if you want to cross a border. You got to have a passport. You need it for that purpose. But I don't think that's the idea that Stevens had in mind when he was saying that, walking isn't essential to golf and, using clubs is, or whatever he thinks. The idea is not that you need this for some purpose, but rather this is that what golf is, centrally involves using a club, but doesn't centrally involve walking. So I think that what was going on here was that there was a kind of confusion between different senses of essence. So there absolutely is this sense of essence, meaning like what you need for some purpose. But there's also this more philosophical sense about what something is. What is the nature of this activity or of this thing or this property or whatever. And that's the sense of essence. That's the kind of essence that I wanted to talk about in this book.
Absolutely. And you then move on from these active and latent facts, and then you talk about essence in regards, or as it, I just talked to someone who talked about concepts tangling together. So that's the word that keeps coming to mind. It gets entangled with other philosophical concepts. What are some of those other philosophical concepts, and how do they both illuminate or sometimes confuse the issue?
Yeah, so I think it's actually one of the best ways to understand the notion of essence better is to just understand how it connects to these other ideas in philosophy. So some of them have kind of already come up in this conversation, like the idea of the definition of something, like maybe like golf, like what golf is. So Stevens had his definition about using clubs to cause a ball to progress to a hole. And you could say that's an attempt, maybe it's wrong, an attempt to give the essence of golf. And, we might say that maybe that's also what's going on in the case of something like the example of water, which I brought up before. Say like water is, by its very nature, a certain chemical compound, H2O. That's the essence of water. There's a way in which you can see that as a kind of definition of water, telling you what water is. So that's a concept that seems to be very closely connected to essence. And very, very related to that is the idea of something's identity, like the identity of water is this chemical compound H2O. The identity of, maybe we can even talk about the identity of a person. Some philosophers have thought that who your parents are is essential to you, or at least sort of your material origins. So if we want to say like what somebody is, like what is the identity of George W. Bush? We're going to have to talk about his father, George H.W. Bush. So those are some concepts that are closely connected to essence. It also seems to be linked to one concept that's sort of loomed very large in much of the recent discussion of essence is it's called modality. So this is a way of referring to necessity and possibility. What has to be the case and what could have been the case. Again, this has already come up a little bit. But it seems like if something is essentially a certain way, it seems like it has to be that way. So say I'm essentially human. That's part of what it is to be me, is to be a human being. Well, that seems to show that I couldn't have been non-human. I couldn't have been a cat or a fried egg or something like that. That's because it's part of my essence to be human. So there seems to be that kind of connection, that if you're essentially some way, then you have to be that way. And some philosophers have thought that actually we could use this kind of link, or that this link is so strong that it could allow us to actually give a theory of the very notion of necessity. This is something that philosophers have been puzzled about for a long time. We say these things like, what goes up must come down, or like, I have to be human, I couldn't be a cat. But like, what does that really mean? And how is that, what does that amount to? And what makes those things true? Well,
what does it mean for something to be necessary?
Yeah, what does it mean for something to be necessary? I mean, it's sort of like, it seems like we have to go beyond the way things in fact are, because we're talking about how they have to be. Even if things were in fact different, these other necessary truths would still hold. So one idea that people have had is that this could be explained by talking about the essences of things. That, like, in fact, everything that's necessary, whenever you find a necessary truth, let's set aside the physical sort of laws of nature type of things, like what goes up must come down. But say something like Martin is human. Whenever you find a necessary truth like that, there's always something's essence that kind of gives rise to that necessary truth. So in this case, it'd be my essence. My essence is to be human. And that's why I couldn't have failed to be human. And same thing with water. Water has to be H2O, and that's because it is essentially H2O. And so people have thought maybe you could give a theory of all of modality this way. Some other... go ahead.
I was just going to ask. I mean, this. I think a lot of this is where we start getting into, because the phrase doesn't make sense, like that something's within or without the world. Like immediately, you're like, "What's the world then? If it's without the world, wouldn't that, all these weird questions?" But when you start talking about necessity and the fact that this goes beyond even those things that are, and this is where you get off into very, very long tangents in philosophical history, right? And so I just wanted to bring, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, this is where you have the forms, this is where you have all that stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, people have been kind of getting confused and wondering about this for a long time. But, maybe this is a good point to try to connect this back to the active latent thing, or are essences inside or outside of the world? Maybe with this connection to necessity, you can start to see why this is such a hard question to answer, because it seems like, if you like the idea that, the reason it's necessary that I'm human is because of something about my essence, that I'm essentially human. And that's starting to make it seem like these, just like when I say that it's necessary that I'm human, I have to kind of go beyond the way things in fact are. I have to talk about sort of what's outside of this world. Well, anything that explains that is also going to maybe have to be outside of the world. You might start to think in that direction. Okay, but not that that's, obviously true or something, but you might start to wonder if that's how things have to go. But then, on the other hand, if I've got a glass of water here on the table in front of me, and then I can just say like, okay, there's some water here in front of me on the table. I'm just telling you how things in fact are. And then what's water? Well, what's this stuff? It's H2O. Aren't I just kind of continuing to say how things are? That starts to make it seem like, no, this isn't about what's outside the world at all, whatever that's supposed to mean. This is just a mundane fact about how things really are. This is one example of how I think thinking about these kinds of connections between essence and these other concepts can help bring clarity to this sort of questions that may have initially seemed really obscure.
And it also brings us back full circle to you talking about explanation, right? Because like at the end of the day, when we talk about necessity, and which is very closely tied to this idea of identity, it's like, look, the only reason I want to know if this is water or not is because I want to know if I can drink it, right? Like that's like when I talk about explanations, they're grounded, even as we're talking about, something like the golf thing, which actually, that made a difference in that person's life. And we start to face a lot of this with upcoming bioethical questions. So actually, like for people, this might seem super abstract, but there's a lot of work going on with the Mind Uploading Project. My editor is actually doing his master's in philosophy, and he's writing a paper on the Mind Uploading Project. And it's like things like okay, if we copy over someone's brain states into a computer, now you have a person and you have a you have a computer with all the same memories. Like, is that memory state, if it's functioning in a computer brain, if I can put it that way, is that a person, right? And I know you're familiar with these, but it's like it doesn't seem like a big deal until you start running into some of this stuff, and you're like, no, that there's two of them, and there can't be two of one thing, and it gets really
There's that kind of problem, and there is also questions of essence that arise there too, because you might have thought like, what am I? Like, what is my nature? Well, maybe one thing is like, I'm a kind of biological organism. That's part of what I am. Well, if that's right, then whatever gets uploaded into a computer, that can't be me. That's not a biological organism. It's something else. So then you have to think, well, maybe I was wrong about the idea that I am essentially a biological organism. Maybe that was wrong. Or maybe it's wrong that I could survive by uploading my brain to a computer.
Yeah. I was just thinking of ways that, as we talk about this, like it's one of those abstract questions that just has its tendrils in so many different things. So sorry, I'm just like a lot of
I think that's
neurons
right,
firing for me.
I think you're right about that. I think it's kind of like it shares that feature with a lot of many other kind of debates, and especially in metaphysics, because they tend to be about, or a lot of times they can be about these kind of basic concepts that are sort of very deeply woven into our thought and action all the time. And we would just, even if you've never heard the word essence, you have the idea of like what something is.
Right.
And you may use that to think about, how you could change it or what kinds of changes you couldn't perform to it and things like that. So because of that, I think that these questions about essence really do kind of, in a way, shed light on everything, because they're so deeply involved in all of our ordinary thinking.
I mean, and that it's so closely tied to definition. And if words, like words start to have meaning, right? Like it just gets very slippery. And I feel that even as we talk, right? Like it's like all of a sudden words like that we think we know start slipping out from between our fingers.
That can be a problem in philosophy.
Man, I was going to ask you. You mentioned briefly, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, so feel free to move on in a different direction. But you talked a little bit about how time affects this. Do you mind expounding on that a little bit? Because that I understand you had you have a certain amount of pages you have to work inside of, but that part really interested me as you were talking about like time, A theory time and B theory time. If I'm saying it correctly. Yeah.
So I was thinking that. Well, let me talk first about just that idea on its own terms, and then I'll connect it to what I was saying. So
sure.
Yeah, there's this really interesting question in philosophy of time about, does the world we all the time distinguish between things that happen in the past, things that are happening now, things that happen in the future. This is ubiquitous. But what's kind of the status of that distinction that we're making? Is that just sort of something about me, or about us? Like we happen to be located at a certain time, say, and so we say that things past, that just means it came before us. Say that something's future, it just means that it comes after us. But there's nothing objective there. It's kind of like saying that certain things are here. Like there's a laptop here that I'm speaking into, and some other things are not here. But that's not any kind of objective difference. It's just like about how things are relative to me. When I say that it's here, that's just something like, it's near me. So is past, present, and future like that, where it's just about kind of how things relate to us? Or is it sort of more objective, like there's really a basic fact, a basic distinction between things that are happening now and things that already happened and things that will happen? Like maybe the things that are happening now are more real than things that already happened, things like that, events in the past, like Caesar crossing the Rubicon. They once had this kind of reality and vivid quality, but now they don't anymore. So which of these ideas is correct? This is a debate that has been carried on in philosophy with really unhelpful names, like the A theory gets used for the view that there is a basic or a fundamental distinction, objective distinction between past, present, and future. And then the view on which there's no basic distinction, and it's just kind of all about how things are related to us, that gets called the B theory. So I brought this up because it's kind of relevant to this active versus latent distinction. Because I was using, when I gave you the examples of the different facts, I said, well, here's an example of a latent fact, like facts about the past, like I was asleep 10 hours ago or whatever. That's a latent fact. But that's being a little sloppy, because it's only a latent fact if you have this kind of A theory view where you think there's a real important objective distinction between the past and the present. I mean, if you think that, then it does seem right to say that, well, the fact that I was asleep 10 hours ago, that's not really about how things are. That's about kind of this sort of ghostly realm of how things used to be and they're no longer that way or whatever. Okay, so that seems like an okay example of a latent fact if you have that view. But what if you're instead one of these people that thinks, no, there's no objective distinction between the past, the present, and the future. It's like here versus elsewhere. Well, then it seems like the fact that I was asleep 10 hours ago is it's no less real, no less about how things are than the fact that I'm talking to you. These are both kind of equivalent or on a par, on a level playing field. So that's an additional layer of complexity that you have to deal with when you're thinking about active versus latent, because you have to think, okay, well, how would I think about this if I thought that the present was special in this way, and how would I think about it if I thought the present wasn't special?
Yes, yeah, it's a lot of stuff to take in the first few pages. I'm not gonna lie. As I was walking through this, and I'm tracking through, and I'm thinking about it. How does that play into things like modality and necessity and explanation?
This thing about thing about time.
Yes, when you does time affect kind of at that intersection of some of those concepts and time and essence? It feels like that would make a difference, but I could be wrong.
I'm sure it does.
Instead of saying, sorry, that was a very vague. Let's take necessity. Like I'm thinking about so we look at the A theory of time, the B theory of time. It seems like past facts wouldn't have to be necessary, but they would be in A time, but they would be in B time.
So So part of what's difficult in talking about this is that the very word necessity, it has so many meanings. So,
right.
We've been talking about one kind of necessity that seems sort of really objective, like water must be H2O. It's somehow like that. At least it feels like that's nothing about how I'm thinking about it. That's like about reality or something like that. There's other kinds of necessity that don't have that character. Like if I say, well, it must be that the climate is getting warmer. And maybe I'm saying that after I've read a bunch of scientific papers or something. And what I mean is something like, given the evidence that I've seen, this must be true given everything that I know now. That's something more about my knowledge. It's not like necessary in that completely objective sense. Like, of course, I can imagine a possible world where the climate is not getting warmer, but it's necessary given the facts that I know. So that's one example of how there can be these different senses of necessity. And there is also yet another sense of necessity that seems to be really closely connected to history. So this is a sense in which you can't change the past. So if what's done is done, and you can't change that now. In some sense, it's necessary. I can't do anything about it. I can't go back and if I did something I regret, I can't change it now. It's necessary. So that there's that kind of sense of necessity. And one question is, how does that relate to this this objective kind of necessity we were talking about before, the sense in which water must be H2O? Is it the same? And I don't think it's exactly the same because, maybe, like I went to grad school in philosophy. That's in the past, and that can't, that's necessary in this historical sense. Nothing I can do now can change that. But it's not necessary in this other sense, because of course I can imagine a different world where I did something completely different and never went to grad school. So it doesn't seem like it's that kind of necessity. Then on the other hand, it seems more objective or more about the world than this thing about what I know, the sense in which given the facts I know, it must be that the climate is getting warmer. That's about me and what I know. This thing about the past can't be changed, that seems more objective. That's not about what I know. That's more real, more worldly somehow.
And I think
it can get, it's very interesting to think about how these things connect.
And thank you. I appreciate your patience as I work through this. And I realized part of the reason I kind of lost the example that I was thinking of when I asked that question. I'm thinking about memories and identity, right? Mm-hmm. So when we're talking about the past and we're talking about what is necessary, and a lot of times what people, when they say, this is who I am, they may talk about being a biological organism. That is, I know right now, I'm sure there are people listening like, where did that question come from? But I like that idea of historic, like I see some merging between identity and essence, and things that we consider essences that are both necessary in the strongest sense, like if we can distinguish between that water's H2O and that historical sense, right? I mean, even if we talk about social construction and what are like, oh, that's the essence of something, and it is like, if that makes sense, we talk about what a dollar bill is or something like that, something that is only given its value by society. Does that make sense?
It does, definitely. There's so many interesting things that what you just said raises. I mean, one thing that's really interesting is this thing about who I am. And there's something that sounds so bizarre that you say when you say like, well, who I am is a biological organism. That's sort of like if someone said that to you, you'd think they're insane. And I think there's a reason for that, which is that the phrase, this is who I am, we don't usually use that to talk about essence in the sense of this book. I think it's more like, we'll use that's like who I am as a person, or what makes me the person that I am. And that might involve things like my experiences in the past, or maybe my values, my aspirations for the future, my personality, things like that. And that does seem to be something that's like very important to me. And yet I think it's probably not essential in the sense that I'm talking about, because it seems like, at least for many of those things, certainly for like things I've done in my life, or maybe even my values, I can imagine a possible scenario in which I didn't do any of those things and maybe had completely different values if I had very different experiences in life. So even these things that are very important to me perhaps are not part of my essence. Now, the thing about social essences or social construction is also extremely interesting, because that's something that I wish I had the space to talk about in the book. That's a case where you might start to really be pushed towards the inside the world view, the view on which essence facts are active, because it seems like something I do or something we do in society, like we create dollar bills or we create institutions, things like that. Something we do somehow gives these things the essences they have. Maybe if that's right, then it seems like it's depending on things that happen that we do, and so you might think that means that it can't be outside the world in the sense of being latent or anything like that. It's up to us.
I definitely feel full of kind of going back to, you started in different types of explanation, right? And so that's, I think, the core of that who I am thing, in the same way that we would look at someone Um, and I'm sure, like, for a lot of the people listening to this probably grew up and were the nerdy studied types, right? This is that kind of podcast, right? And it's like the kind of kid, like, you start talking about leaves falling off the tree, and they start going, well, actually, when you look at Newtonian mechanistic, physics, and people are like, you're crazy. Like, that's not an explanation. That's weird, right? And so when we say things like, and I think that's a distinction in which the essence of this book and what we often gets uncomfortable for people talking about, like, well, this is who I really am. And they're like, when they think essence, like, this is who I really am. And it's things like family and those kind of things, which actually
Well, I
might be a
think,
bad. Go ahead.
I mean, as I say, these are things that are very important. They're very important to me and to everybody. So I don't want to denigrate them at all. It's just that's I don't think it's part of this concept of essence, but it seems like an extremely important concept to understand. I mean, it's not so clear like how exactly to understand this idea of who I am, or yeah, what makes you the person that you are. I think
Yes,
that's something worth thinking about a lot more. But I don't know whether the answer will come from thinking about essence in the sense of this book.
that makes sense. And maybe this one would kind of bring together a lot of the questions we've been talking about. You'd mentioned that some people want to define people in terms of the parents that they had. And now that does seem historical, but that also does seem necessary, or they're attempting to be necessary in a stronger sense. What do you think of that definition of a human being? Do you find that valuable? And do you think that explanation works?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I have some sympathy for that idea. I mean, maybe it's not a. I mean, a definition maybe should tell you not just some of the essence of something, but all of it. It should tell you like everything that's essential. And I don't think that's saying everything that's essential. Um, but yeah, I am kind of attracted to the idea that in general the origins of things are essential to them. So it's not just people. It could be like material objects too, like a table that was made from a certain chunk of wood or block of wood. Um, if you consider another table that looks exactly like it but was made from some other chunk of wood, you might say, well, that's not that table. It's a different table. That table can only be made from that chunk of wood. And yeah. So I think that. So I think you find this pattern not just for people, but also for material objects. Um, and that is kind of what I get into in the last part of the book, is to think that maybe this idea could hold the key to a kind of explanation of essences and sort of where the essences of things come from, why they have the essences they do. It has to do with their origins. And perhaps that pushes us in the direction of thinking that the essences are inside the world, that they're active because they're the result of the origins of things, which is a historical process that goes on in this world.
I was going to ask next was kind of, you have that summation of essential facts are explained by the origins of things, right? And and you talk about facts are active. How does necessity play into the fact that active facts are key to, I don't say necessary, but are key to explaining essences?
Sorry, can you say that again?
Well, I think one thing, so what's the relationship between active and necessary?
Yeah, so I was thinking that facts about what's necessary are not active. They
Yes.
have this
Okay.
kind of character uh, reaching beyond the way things are to sort of other possible worlds. So they're not active.
And so as we look at, and I'm taking from what you said a little bit, essentialist facts are explained by the origins of things. Let me see if I can find the exact quote. Because I don't, not because I'm trying to pin you down here. It's just because I want to make sure I'm not saying it wrong.
Sure.
Um, Essentialist facts are explained by the origins of things to the conclusion that such facts are active.
Yeah.
Um, can you explain that statement to me?
Well, so this is what I was saying. So, I mean, origins, that's something that happens in this world. And, we can originate things, we can create things,
Yes.
and we have origins and all that. Nothing sort of otherworldly about this.
Right,
So I
right.
was thinking, suppose it's right that these facts explain why things have the essences they do, then that seems like that might be a good reason to think that essentialist facts are active, because they're explained by these facts about how things originate, which are active. They're just about how things go in this world.
Forgive me. And for some reason, I think this is just a mental block for me. Can you give me an example?
Yeah. So, take the table example. So I was saying, maybe you think that this table essentially comes from a certain block of wood. So why does it essentially come from this block of wood? Why is that kind of part of what the table is? Well, maybe the answer is because that's how the table was made. The table was made from this block of wood, and that's why this is part of what it is, or part of what's essential to it, is that it came from this block of wood. So that's a reason why you might think that the facts about the essence of the table are explained by its origin. And look, the facts about the origin of the table, they seem to be kind of active, just like the facts about, I'm talking to you, it's cloudy, these cities are so many miles apart from one another, or whatever. This table originated from this block of wood. It's a fact of the same category. It's an active fact.
So when you say, and this is where, as we're talking about active facts, when you say originated, that changes it from a fact that's in the past, right? Because when you're saying originated, it is an active fact.
Well, okay, you're getting at sort of a subtlety to this argument. So,
Okay.
Yeah, it kind of, so it depends on this question about time that we were talking about earlier.
Okay, that's what I was hoping you'd say. So I am tracking with you. Okay, that's good.
Yeah. So that's why, like, this argument sort of, I feel like it has some initial appeal, but then when you really try to develop it, it turns out that there's like a lot of complications that arise.
Yeah.
And one of them is this thing about these different views of time.
Got it.
Because if you're one of these guys that thinks the present is special, then the facts about how things originate are not active. There's these latent facts, and so we can't say that anymore. So you're right.
Wouldn't the fact that it did originate, wouldn't you be able, if you stated it that way, be different from the fact that it of the past itself? Does that make sense?
So what is the second fact? So the fact
you have like when you talk about, so we're talking about the wood in the table.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's so slippery. You have the wood in the table, and it's like you're talking about the wood in the past, and that's not an active fact. But when you're like the wood in this table originated from somewhere in the past, like if you're talking about what kind of wood it is, would that be active? And I think this is where
I'm thinking the answer depends on your view about this question about time that we talked about before, this A versus B theory thing. Because to say that the table originated from this block of wood, that if you think that the present is sort of more real than the past, the present is special, then you won't think that's an active fact, because it's not like these facts about how things are, these other facts. Those are all facts about the present. But instead, if you had this other view on which the past and the present are on an even playing field, then the fact that the table originated from this piece of wood, well, that's just as real as the fact that I'm talking to you now.
Okay, so I think I understand that. And maybe it's just a dead end, but it feels like the explanation does exist in the present, and so the explanation could be active, whereas the actual history. Maybe that's just too. Maybe I'm like in a dead end there, and maybe what I'm wondering is if there's a way to state the origins of the table in a way that satisfies the I believe the A theory of time.
Let's see. So,
and that might just be like a really. For some reason, and this might just be because I'm just thinking about this for the first time. In many ways, that might just be a complete dead end. But for some reason, I feel like there's a way of doing that. But that might be the classic Wittgenstein fly stuck in the glass bottle. I think I see a solution, but I'm running into the glass. Like,
I think there's always a way, and so I think that there is. What's coming to mind is something that would it'd be very weird in some other ways, but it's this view that has been discussed the past couple of decades called fragmentalism, and the idea is that let's see. So the atheist, here's a way to think about it. The atheist wants to take to be special facts in the present tense, if you want to put it that way. So they like the facts like I am talking to you, and they think those are really active, those are real, and then they don't like facts in the past tense, or they think they're less real or something like that. Well, according to this view called fragmentalism, we say that, well, actually, that's all fine, but there are some other facts that we haven't been recognizing. There's not just the fact that the table originated in the past from this block of wood. There's also somehow the fact that the table is originating from this block of wood. And you say, wait a second, how could that be? There isn't. It is not originating. It's not originating now. The table is here. It was already made. So how can there be this present tense fact that it is originating? And they say, well, there is. It's just kind of not. It's not part of this domain of facts that you're looking at here. But there is that fact out there in another fragment of reality, so to speak. Okay, who knows whether you can make sense of this idea? But if you can, then this would be a way to argue that this fact about origination is active. It's active. It's just as real as the fact that I'm talking to you now, but it's in this other fragment, whatever that means. So yeah, I mean, I think this view is very interesting, but there's a real question as to whether it even makes sense.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate you've been very patient. This is obviously not my area, and so I really appreciate you talking through this with me today.
Well, it's really fun.
Yeah, kind of as we wrap up here, what's one thing you would leave as a takeaway for our audience?
I think this the issue about it's something that's already come up in this conversation. These facts about who one is as a person. I think this is really worth thinking about more. I think that there hasn't been much work done on it in philosophy, actually, and it does seem to be something that's, it's very connected to the idea of essence, even though I think maybe it's not quite the same. But it's sort of like it's not hard to get the feeling, if you spend a lot of time working on essence and you start to think about the essence of persons, you feel like you're sort of leaving out some of the things that we wanted to know the most, or it's the things that are the most important. Like, maybe like the particular my origins are essential to me, and like that I'm a human being or something like that. But aren't there sort of all these other things that are in some sense core to me that don't count as part of my essence in this sense? Seems like we ought to be able to have a theory of those things too. And how would the question of like spelling that out and what the connections between that concept and the concept of this other concept of essence would be, I think is something worth thinking about.
Absolutely. Dr. Glazier, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed it.